After hearing rumors that Tom Cruise is planning to take a film crew into space to film some scenes for Mission Impossible 8, we decided we'd take a look into how VFX in space films has changed since the first sci-fi film ever, Voyage Dans La Lune, in 1902 up to the present day. Buckle in, this one's gonna be long. In Le Voyage Dans La Lune, or A Trip to the Moon, director George Melies used multiple effects techniques throughout the film. For the scene where the astronomers' telescopes transform into stools and the Selenites explode into a puff of smoke, he used the Substitution Splice, or stop trick technique. This technique requires the camera operator to stop filming and maintain the framing long enough for something on set to be changed, added, or removed. The Substitution Splice technique was also used to make the capsule suddenly appear stuck in the man in the moon's eye. However, in order to create the previous shot where the camera seems to approach the man in the moon, George actually created a dolly shot. Officially, the dolly wasn't invented until 1907. However, in 1902, George created this pseudo-dolly shot using a technique he'd invented the previous year. By getting the actor playing the man in the moon to sit on a pulley-operated chair that was mounted on some rails on a ramp, George was able to pull the actor towards the camera and get a steady approaching shot of the actor's face. During the years between 1902 and 1950, innovation within the movie industry continued. Sound, color, the blue screen method, and traveling mats were just a few of the advances that were achieved during this time period, and despite 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the atomic bomb, the effects industry continued to evolve and grow, as did our interest in space. One of the great things about sci-fi films is that the filmmakers have the chance to imagine interesting ways of achieving things that mankind has yet to achieve, and then they have to somehow imagine some way of portraying them on screen. Destination Moon was made at a time when, even though we had an interest in the moon and outer space, we knew relatively little about either. What we did know is that the moon would probably be a barren place with low gravity and no oxygen. In the scene where the crew must go outside the ship to free off a frozen antenna, the effects team had to work out how to convincingly depict deep space, and also how to show the actors floating around as if they were weightless. For the space background, they actually used hundreds of 12-volt bulbs in front of a black backdrop to depict the stars, and they achieved the weightless effect by having the actors attached to piano wires on pulleys hanging from a crane. This effect wasn't easy though. The studio lights would reflect on the wires, making them visible on the shot, so the camera angles and the actors' movements had to be carefully choreographed to avoid these reflections. In the scenes inside the spaceship, the director also wanted to show how weightlessness would affect the crew, so the effects team came up with a rotating set that the camera was fixed to. The walls would then rotate underneath the actor, but in camera it would appear that the actor was walking around the walls. The effects team also used matte paintings to emulate the barren lunar landscape. However, due to the size of the lot they were shooting on, these shots lacked depth to them, and so the effects team drew cracks onto the matte paintings, larger ones at the bottom and getting smaller as they went up. This gave the illusion of perspective. In some of the shots they even used dwarves dressed in smaller spacesuits to maintain the illusion. Throughout the 1950s and indeed most of the 60s, space films pretty much carried on the same. There were different plots, some comedy, some romantic, and some just straight sci-fi, but all following the same track of unconvincing model spacecraft hanging on cables and actors either acting weightless or conveniently having a gravity-producing device on board. This was so until 1968 and Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. In this film, Kubrick pushed the effects team to improve and perfect methods they already used, but to also imagine and invent new ones. For the shots inside the spaceship's giant gravity-producing centrifuge, Kubrick had a rotating Ferris wheel built, not dissimilar to the rotating room in Destination Moon, but a lot bigger, 10 feet wide and 38 feet in diameter. It alone cost $750,000 $100,000 to build. The camera had two different mounting points on the wheel. One was independent of the wheel so it could follow the actor as he ran around, and the other was mounted on the wheel to show the centrifuge moving around under the actor. All the set pieces inside the centrifuge had to be fixed down, and in the scene where Bowman enters the centrifuge from the hub and has to join Poole, who is sat down on the opposite side, the actor playing Poole was actually upside down and strapped into the chair so Bowman could walk round him. Other improvements that were made to existing methods were the models and how they were filmed. They were no longer small models made to look space age and futuristic. They were made to look highly realistic and plausible, and they were big. The model of the Discovery 1 spacecraft was 55 feet long. In order to control the way the model moved in the shot, instead of filming them by moving them on cables in front of a stationary camera, much like George Melies did in 1902, moving an object towards the camera, they attached the camera to a special mechanical mount on a dolly, which they moved around the stationary models. The camera's motor was linked to a special mount, enabling them to repeat the exact same moves and the exact same speed multiple times. This meant they could combine different light phases, planets, and other models seamlessly within the same shot. This was the first motion-controlled camera, and it opened the door to a whole new era of visual effects. During the rest of the late 60s and early 70s, space movies pretty much emulated what had happened after Destination Moon in the 50s. Even though models were getting more and more realistic and electronics and computers began to become more widely used, filmmakers were concentrating less on making outer space realistic and more on creating fantasy worlds. Some of these fantasies were intelligent, like Planet of the Apes. Others were humorless comedies like Dark Star, and others, well, others had Sean Connery in a red diaper with knee-high leather boots and a ponytail. Then, in 1977, along came George Lucas with Star Wars and John Dykstra and the Dykstraflex. The Dykstraflex is a motion control camera with electric servos and motors that can be controlled digitally. It has 7-axis motion. It can pan, roll, boom, tilt, swing, control the shutter and the lens focus, and all this can be precisely controlled, programmed, and repeated. This system allowed Lucas to seamlessly composite multiple models in one shot and to produce the iconic shot of the Star Destroyer's underbelly. Without the Dykstraflex, none of the movies would have been the same, and the Star Wars movie franchise probably wouldn't be what it is today. From here on, space sci-fi films continue to improve. Star Trek, Alien, Total Recall, to name a few, really pushed the VFX industry forward. But the majority of space films still remained very much anchored in the world of fantasy. With space science fiction films, people just accept that they are fiction and immerse themselves in the story. For example, no one really wonders why or how every ship and planet in the Star Wars films has gravity. They just accept this as a constraint. However, this doesn't work when the space film you're making isn't really sci-fi, but it's actually sci-fact. Apollo 13 told the story of Jim Lovell and his crew and their fight to return to Earth. But because this was a true story that had already happened, people had already seen real NASA photography and footage, and so Apollo 13 had to be as realistic as possible. To accomplish this, the director Ron Howard chose to shoot all the wider angle shots in real zero gravity. To do this, they built replicas of the command module and the lunar module inside NASA's Boeing KC-135 reduced gravity aircraft. This aircraft was used by NASA to train real astronauts, and it would fly at 350 knots, pull up at a 45-degree angle, and reduce power until its thrust was equal to its drag. This would cause the aircraft to slowly level off and then begin to dive, giving the occupants of the aircraft around 23 seconds of weightlessness. If you've ever driven a car a bit fast over a dip in the road, you've probably experienced a similar feeling in your stomach. With such a short period of time of actually being weightless, every scene had to be cut into short 20-second shots, and even though for close-up shots the actors were either performing on a box or hanging on wires, they still had to do 612 flights to get all the wider angle shots they needed. CGI was also used extremely effectively in the launch sequence. Digital models were based on NASA's footage to make them more realistic. Virtual cameras allowed them to take shots from places it would be impossible to put a real camera, and digital particle simulations, motion blur, and lighting gave the shots a realness that still holds up today. Contact, Starship Troopers, and the Star Wars prequels all dove deeper into digital effects and techniques. Motion capture, LiDAR scanning, crowd particle and fluid simulations, digital lighting, and compositing were invented, developed, and improved. By the time the film Gravity came along, the number of tools available to the VFX team was extensive. Gravity had a lot of extended continuous takes in space, some as long as 15 minutes. This, in theory, wasn't a problem. The space backgrounds could be 2.5D mats, the spacecraft could be 3D models, they could create dust and debris digitally, and even the actors could be digital doubles. Their faces and performances, however, could not. To overcome this problem, the VFX team created the light box. Here, actors were put into a spacesuit and then strapped into tilt rigs inside a box covered with LED panels, and it was filmed with a motion control camera. This meant that the VFX team could project their 2.5D mats on the panels around the actor, and it would move in accordance with how the actor did. All these movements, including those of the motion control camera, could then be recorded and translated into their digital world, where the actors' movements, camera movements, and even the lighting on the actors' faces would all match up perfectly. The lightbox technique would be further improved in the 2018 movie First Man, but instead of a tiny box for just the actor, they built a 35 feet tall, 65 feet wide semicircle of LED screens. These screens could project any footage they wanted, but because they were so big, spacecraft simulators could be set up in front of them. These simulators were then programmed to move in sync with the images on the screens, thus capturing the actor's performance and the complete visual effect entirely in camera. The Midnight Sky then took all these techniques one step further, using anima capture, a marketless facial performance capture system, and combining it with their own cutting-edge proprietary shaders. They were able to create high-resolution digital faces so convincing that they were able to do full digital face replacements on the actors. The spacewalk scene alone has 70 fully CG performances. So, just as with motion cameras, color grading, chroma keying, matte painting, model making, and virtually every other VFX technique, they were first perfected mechanically, and then, when there was no room for improvement, they were done digitally. Now we attempt to perfect these digital VFX techniques. Creating CG limbs or even full CG bodies, digital de-aging or similarly fattening, making full digital doubles or deepfakes. Soon we'll sit down to watch a movie and won't be able to tell if what we are seeing is real or fake. And come to think of it, is that really such a bad thing? I mean, isn't that the point of VFX? Making something fictional look real? Let us know what you think in the comments. We'd love to know your opinion on this. And please give us a like if you enjoyed this video. Don't forget the links to the music used in this video are in the video description. And as always, be sure to let us know which movie VFX you'd like to see behind next.